So we are ready again for the last talk before the lunch. Lunch is coming. We have already had 3 great talks, and we have now a little break again. And we shifted the setup, I see. And actually, Ondřej was here last year and talked about how to get from you amp up your strictness using PHPStan and what to do, what not to do. And I personally learned that PHPStan wasn't itself checked against the maximum level. So that's one thing, one fun fact I gave to my colleagues. And today you brought us how to write our custom rules in PHPStan. And for that, it's your stage.
I don't have the mic.
Oh.
We forgot about the mic.
So, anyone here from our technical guys? But you can also applaud these 2 guys here.
Now you can hear me? Yeah, okay, awesome. So, hello, my name is Ondřej Mirtes, and I know that you are all very hungry, but I'm going to give you some food for thought. All right, so who uses PHPStan? Yeah, the whole room? So I don't have to go into much detail explaining what it does. Basically, it type checks your code, and the output looks something like this. So it's able to tell you what's wrong with your code type-wise, if you are calling some undefined method or accessing undefined variable, if you are passing wrong arguments, if you have some unintentional dead code, for example, if you are asking about conditions that are always true, and so on. So the main topic of today is writing custom rules. And the reason for why someone would want to write a custom rule for their code base in PHPStan is automation. So when you are doing code reviews, I hope that you are doing code reviews. Yeah, not everyone. So if in code reviews the same problem comes up again and again, it would be a good idea to have it reported automatically by PHPStan and have CI failed with this commonly repeated problem in your code so that you can focus on more important stuff that only a human can check. And doing it automatically in CI makes it much more reliable. So the point of custom rules is to report code that is valid PHP. So here we don't want to rely on someone reading this comment and abiding by this comment, and we want to check automatically if someone calls a new person outside of the single place where it's allowed to be called from person factory. And the motivation is, for example, if you want to check the database for the uniqueness of the username, or if you want to validate the email with some actual DNS lookup or something like that. So having new person anywhere in the code base should be flagged as wrong, because the only place allowed to do that is person factory. And the point of custom rules is to report code that is valid PHP. This is valid PHP, right? If the constructor is public and if it doesn't have any required arguments, then this is valid PHP. But it's not valid PHP in our code base. That's the moment where you can step in with a custom rule and write one. And once you start getting ideas for custom rules and start implementing them, it gets very addictive. So be careful about it. I know about some companies with bigger developer teams that have employees, that have a full-time employee dedicated to writing custom PHPStan rules. So it's like a 20-person team or 40-person team, and that's the size where this starts making sense to basically support your team developer experience-wise and help set up things like PHP code sniffer and PHPStan and custom rules for PHPStan. So the basic building block of custom rules and of how PHPStan works is the AST, abstract syntax tree. Who has heard of this concept? OK, awesome. A lot of hands are up. And the idea is that we are looking at source code. So in this case, we have a property fetch and calling a static method on self. And the parser that is responsible for parsing this code parses this code and creates an object-like structure. So at the top, we have the root expression, which is Boolean end. And the AST can tell us what's on the left side of the Boolean end and what's on the right side of Boolean end. And when we are accessing the left side, we can see that it's a property fetch. And it's property fetched on variable this. And the property fetch name is foo. And on the right side, we have a static call on the current class, on class self. And the method, the called method name is bar. And this is done thanks to an awesome library that a lot of similar tools share, which is called PHPParser by Nikita Popov. And it's on GitHub, so you can inspect the source code and look at how the AST nodes look like. And you can also browse generated source documentation of PHPStan. So at API reference, API ref, phpstan.org, you can see generated documentation of the PHPStan namespace, but because a lot of things from the PHPStan namespace link the PHP parser library, you can also browse the API. Oh, I'm not online. You can see the API of the PHP parser. Now I don't have my cursor. Sorry about it. I have to connect to my hotspot because I will need internet today. Okay. Okay, awesome. So now we are in the PHP parser namespace. You can look at the node. And then here you have a couple of big namespaces. That's expressions and that's statements. So you can see that these class names might look a little bit familiar because they represent all the possible code elements, code constructions that you can have in your PHP code. So we have echo, we have switch, we have return, we have property. So all of these feel familiar, right? So this is what is used to represent all of these different code elements in the abstract syntax tree. All right, if you want to write a custom rule, you need to implement this interface from PHPStan. It has two methods. The first method tells us what node type are we interested in. So this method is supposed to return the class name of the node that we are interested in. And the second method is called for each node in the analyzed source code that matches the node type that we registered our rule for. So if we register our rule for the return statement, and we have 3 return statements in the analyzed file, then the process node method will be called 3 times. And the process node method gets handed the actual node that we are interested in, that we can inspect further. And it also has the scope object, which I am going to be talking about a little bit later, which holds all of the information about the code, about what PHPStan knows. All right, demo time. So I will try to do some live coding today, and I will write the rule for the new person to allow it only in person factory. So we are in PHP Storm. We are going to create a new rule. Let's call it test rule. Let's put it in the right namespace. Let's implement the right interface. Let's implement the methods. Yeah, this is PHP Storm bug. I don't know why it does this. Now it works. We can click through, and we can see there's some documentation about this interface, and it looks like I showed it previously in my slides. So if you don't know anything about the AST, you might have no idea what are you supposed to put into this method, right? So my little tip for you is that you should register this rule initially for all the nodes. So let's just mention the general node. I think that it's an interface. Yeah, it's an interface that all the nodes from the AST share. And let's just dump the class names of the nodes and return an empty array because we are, at this point, we are not reporting any error. So this will be called for all the nodes that the PHPStan is finding in the analyzed code. All right, I will put it side by side next to this test file, and I'll run it. Oh, I still need to register the rules. So let's put it here in rules. That's true. All right, and we are running PHPStan as usual. And I'm adding --debug for a couple of reasons. I want to disable the result cache because I'm now modifying what PHPStan reports, so I always want to run it fresh. And again, because we are var dumping some information here, I want to run it in a single thread, in a single process, and that's what --debug is going to achieve. So now I run it. And I need to show it to you side by side with the file we are actually analyzing. Oh, I will run it again, and I will just analyze the file test.php. Awesome. So now you can kind of follow the structure of the file alongside this output. And you can also see that some of the reported nodes don't have the PHP parser namespace. They have PHPStan namespace. These are something I call virtual nodes, and I will also mention them later. But for now, we just want to focus on the PHP parser nodes. So you can see that we have a namespace, we have a class, we have a class method. Identifier is the method name, is the foo. Then we have an expression, that's the whole line 10. We have expression, then we have an assign, that's assigning a new variable. And on the left side of assign, we have a variable. And on the right side, we have new. And we are interested in new because we want to check occurrences of new person. So this way, we've got the node that we are interested in. So we will just copy the name here. And in order for PHPStorm to autocomplete the properties of this node, we also have to use a little bit of generics. And now PHPStorm is able to autocomplete what's here. So we have the class. We can also open the new class, and we can see that it has two properties. It has a class property, and it has arguments, args property. And you can see what types can be the class property. So it's a name, it's either a name, or an expression, or a class statement. And that means that we have several things this node can represent. So for example, it represents, oh, I will put it here. It represents new person, right? That's the name. It also represents an expression, so we can actually put anything here. So we can, for example, put a variable. This would be an expression. And the same node is also used for anonymous classes, so we can do this. All right, everyone understands? But in this case, we are only interested in the name. So if the node class is not a name, we are going to end early. And now we can, because the name is an object, we can convert it to a string, get the final name that's inside. And if we dump it again, we will see that we have the right thing there. Of course, you can also use xdebug, but For the purposes of this live coding, I would rather not, because it could fail, right? It's quite hard to set up because I need to configure like 3 separate things around my system to have Xdebug work properly. So I'm doing this the old way, but in practice, when I need to debug something in PHPStan, I use Xdebug because it's awesome, but it takes a while to set up. Yeah, so we are dumping the name, and here it is. So we are at the right place in our code, and we just need to eliminate the possibility that it's something else. So if the class name isn't a person, we are going to end early. And now we can report our error. So this interface, in the current stable version, it still supports returning plain strings. So you could just say something like return an array of strings and say that new person is not allowed and explain maybe why. But this is being deprecated, and you are supposed to return a richer object. So you are supposed to use something called rule error builder. So we will going to be doing that. Rule error builder, and you can create a new rule error with this static method, and then you can return it and just say build. So this is going to return the object how PHPStan expects it, and this is we need this object because you can attach more information to this return error, which I will be showing to you a little bit later. So now we are testing it again, and line 10 says that a new person is not allowed. If we try to test it a little bit more, making sure it doesn't have any false positive, if we do new std class, it shouldn't report it. It should only report new person. Yes, so this is the first step of writing our custom rule. And I promised you to describe what's the scope object. So it knows everything about the place in the code where the rule was executed for. So it can tell you the file, the namespace, whether we are in a class, whether we are in a trade, what's the method name, what's the function name, and many more useful methods like that. And we need to use this scope object in our rule because we don't want to report everything, right? If I analyze the whole code base, it's also going to tell us, I lost my cursor again. It's also going to tell us that new person in person factory is not allowed, but that's the single place that it should be allowed. So one option would be to manually ignore it, because you can ignore errors in PHPStan, but I can also show you how to write the rule properly so it doesn't report this false positive. So let's go to the rule. And here we are already sure that we are already doing a new person. And we can ask scope if we are in a class. And if we are in a class, we can ask about the class reflection of the current class. So in class reflection, get class reflection. And now we can ask if the name of the current class is person factory. And if it is, we are going to return early. So now it's going to be reported for all the instances of new person outside person factory. Yeah, only this one is reported. It's also good, it's also best practice to, when we write code against PHPStan itself, whether you are writing custom rules or some other types of extension, it's a good idea to test that code as well. And PHPStan is reporting an error that the method should return identifier rule error, but only returns rule error. And here's a helpful tip for people to understand what's going on. And PHPStan is telling us that the error is missing an identifier, which is a new feature in PHPStan 1.11. And each error is identified not only by its message, but also with its identifier. And there's a link to an article that you can maybe read if you encounter this error later, which explains everything. And there should be some kind of link. Yeah, so this is, oh, it doesn't show up very well, sorry. So for example, an error identifier looks like this. It's something dot something. So ASCII characters are allowed and dot characters are allowed. So you can name your identifiers as you want, and they are mainly used for ignoring errors. And I decided that identifiers will be required in PHPStan 2.0, which is going to be released this year. So that's why this error is reported, and we should fix it. And it means that besides providing a message, we can also call identifier, and we can say that it's something like new person. And now if we run it, we only get a single error here. So this is how to use the scope. All right. So everyone understands it at this point? OK, awesome. So that's great that you can come back to work on Monday and start writing custom rules and annoying all your teammates, right? And just a little side note, it's a good idea to use the baselines. Who uses the baseline with PHPStan? Yeah, so if you want to introduce some stricter coding standard, some new custom rule in your code base, but you have a lot of violations of this rule, you can put them all to your baseline, but you can still register this rule, and it means that all the new code that you write will have to solve these errors, will not be able to have these errors. Only the baseline part of your code base is going to contain these errors. So usually you can generate baseline when you introduce a new rule, and it will mean that you can start enforcing it immediately in new code. All right, another rule. So my idea for another rule to show you is that we should disallow comparing datetime objects with 3 equal signs. And again, it's still valid PHP. It's not invalid PHP, but it might be wrong because the developer who wrote this might have meant something different. So the difference is that they might have wanted to write 2 equal signs, which means that the contents of the objects are compared. And I should have used different variable names. This doesn't make sense. So imagine $A, 2 equal signs $B, OK? Sorry. And so the first example might be what we want. It's comparing contents of the object, so it's asking PHP to compare these 2 objects down to a microsecond. And this might be what we want, right? But if you read with 3 equal signs, it means that on both sides of the equation of the operator must be exactly the same object occupying the same space in memory, which is probably a mistake in case of date times. So you might want to write a custom rule in for your code base. And this is something that we will going to need this method on scope, and it's going to tell us what type an expression is. And for you to understand this, you need to be aware that in PHP parser, there are 2 types of nodes. There are statements and there are expressions. And to give you a few hints, expressions have type. You can resolve expression to a type. You can usually also put expressions into other expressions. And on the other hand, statements are like branching logic. So for example, for loop is a statement. And I want you to guess, or if in case you know, you can just raise your hand. I want you to guess whether of these, which of these are expressions and which are statements. So a variable, is it a statement? Who thinks it's a statement? Who thinks it's an expression? OK, everyone. What about return? Who thinks return is a statement? Who thinks it's an expression? And return is a statement, but it contains a return expression. But the return statement itself is a statement. Yeah. What about switch? Who thinks it's a statement? Who thinks it's an expression? Okay. It's a statement because it's just branching logic. You cannot put switch into anything else. It's a branching logic, so it's a statement. Switch doesn't have a type. What about assign? Expression? Statement? Assign is an expression because, for example, what you can do is that you can call a function, and as an argument of the function, you can assign a variable inside the function call. So this means that we just put an expression into another expression. So assign is an expression. What about instance of? Statement? Expression? It's an expression because, again, you can use it inside other expressions. Yeah, so these are the main differences. So that's why the parameter type of this method is just an expr because it only makes sense to get types of expressions. And what you're going to get is a type interface. And type interface answers all questions about the values and types. So it can tell you whether a type accepts a different type. It can tell you if a type is equal to another type. You can call describe to basically get a textual representation of a type. And you can ask many, many more things. You can ask if it makes sense to fetch properties on a type, if it makes sense to call methods on a type. You can ask if this type, this value has a specific offset, for example, in case of arrays. So it's a huge interface with many, many methods. And these are some examples. I think this is mostly complete list. Maybe there are some omissions of how specific objects that implement the type interface look like. So again, these look familiar, right? These are all the possible types that you can encounter in your PHP code. Mixed, string, integer, float, right? On the right side, there are some special ones. So union and intersections, these are also in PHP. And the never type is a bottom type. So it's a type that's basically empty, that it's an empty intersection that doesn't contain any type. And you can also type it in PHP, I think since 8.1 or 8.2, and you can use it as a return type. And it means that this function never returns, which means that basically it always throws an exception or it contains infinite loop. And you can use it, for example, from PHP unit, the method mark test skipped has a never return type because nothing is executed below this method call. And PHPStan is also aware of specific literal values. So if we do 1 plus 1, for PHPStan, it just doesn't see like two integers. It sees exactly values 1 and 1, and it knows that the result is 2. And it's not because it computes that at runtime, the type inference engine knows it, and you can ask about this in your rules. So for example, if we have a constant string type, and the string contains text, and you use this text as a callable, PHPStan can check if it's an existing function name, because it's aware of all of this. All right, so these are type implementations. And there is a method that I skipped explaining on purpose, because I will explain now. And that is supertype of. And that's something that we call a God method, because if you want to ask type something, you can always use is supertype of. And it's really awesome. So in order to understand is supertype of, I need you to imagine types as circles or as Venn diagrams. So this is a hierarchy, for example, of throwables. So throwable is the blue circle, the biggest type, and all the exceptions are inside the throwable type. And all the invalid argument exceptions are inside the exception type. So you can imagine these types as overlapping circles. And is supertype of is going to tell us how these types relate to each other. So for example, if we ask, is throwable a supertype of exception, we can see that it's clearly a yes, right? And it doesn't just return a Boolean, it returns a trinary logic object, because we also need to say that it's a maybe, right? So if we ask the other way around, if we ask if an exception is a supertype of throwable, it might be, right? It returns maybe because it might be inside the circle or it might be outside the circle. And again, if we ask is exception a supertype of invalid argument exception, again, it's a yes because the entire type of invalid argument exceptions is inside the green exception circle. And this is used in practice in PHPStan all over the place. And one such example is the rule that checks if this specific instance of expression makes sense. So let's say that we are accepting an exception in this method, and we are asking, is this exception an instance of throwable? That's a yes, that's always true, because every exception is an instance of throwable. So we ask, is throwable a supertype of exception? And that's a yes, so it's always true. The only instance of that makes sense to ask in this code is the middle one, because asking, is this exception instance of invalid argument exception? That's a maybe, because this exception might be invalid argument exception, or it might be something else. And if we ask about some completely unrelated class that can never be an exception, we ask, is exception instance of std class that is supertype of returns no, because it can never be true. So this is how it's used in practice. So PHPStan checks this and reports errors for the first case and for the last case. And it works with all the types across the type system. So you can ask the same thing about integers, for example. So integer is a supertype of 1. Also, a type is a supertype of itself, because it's an overlapping circle, so it's also a yes. And if we ask, is 1 a supertype of integer? That's a maybe, because the integer might be 1, but it might be something else. And if we ask about a completely unrelated type, like a string, string is never a supertype of an integer. Okay, it also works for union types. So if you have a union of all strings and all integers, and you ask, is this union a supertype of some specific string? That's a yes. It's also a supertype of a union of some specific string and some specific number. So this method should always work like this as expected. All right, so now we are going to use this method in our custom rule. So let's write it. Let's write a rule that will report that datetime is identical to a different datetime, and that it should be reported as something that we don't want to have in our code. Okay, I'm going to reset this, and we are going to write a new rule. So let's accept some kind of date times here, and this is something that we won't report it as an error. So we will create our rule again, and we will figure out for which node type we want to register our rule. Again, PHPStorm is acting up for some reason. Generates invalid PHP, just because, I don't know why. And we are going to return the general node that everything implements. And we are going to dump the class again. And we need to register the rule again. Okay, cool. And we can run it on our test file. And if we look at it side by side, we will see a namespace, use statement, use item, because use statement can contain multiple used classes, so that's why there's a single use item. We have a class, we have a class method, we have some names here. Those are the parameter types. Fully qualified param, fully qualified identifier. And now we are inside our method, and we have an if statement. And we could hook our rule onto an if statement, but there are also other places where this might show up. So for example, in a ternary operator, for example, right? So we want to register our rule for this node called identical, because this means it's 3 equal signs. If it was called equal, that's 2 equal signs. So we want identical. And so we are going to use this in our rule. We are going to use generic so that we have auto-completion. Great. And now if we look at the node, it extends binary operation, and many nodes extend binary operation. And binary operation always has a left side and a right side, and on both sides there can be any expression. And now we are going to use in the rule, we are going to get the types of the left side and the right side. So left type is scope get type node left, and on the right side we are going to have the right type. Right. And now we have to recall this concept. So we have to ask if there's a date time on both sides, but date time isn't just a single class in PHP. We have date time immutable, and there is also a common interface, datetime interface. So if you imagine these datetime classes instead of exceptions, the biggest circle would be the datetime interface, and the smaller circles, separate circles, would be the datetime class and the datetime immutable class, which means that we need to ask if these are a supertype of the datetime interface. So I will use short variable name here, and we are going to create a new object type of class datetime interface. I hope it used the right one. Yeah, it did. And now, if on the left side is something that isn't a supertype of datetime interface, we are going to return early. And if on the right side is something that isn't a supertype of datetime interface, we are also going to return early. And now, at this point in our code, we can report this error. Operator between this and this is not allowed, and we will build it, and we will use a printf function, and we will build our message using these placeholders. All right, so we can convert the type to some kind of string textual representation, so we can call describe. And this method has a required argument called level. So it's something called verbosity level. And it just influences how verbose describing the type is. So sometimes you want more verbose description, but in this case, you just want to know what's the type. And we are going to run it. And it's going to complain that on line 12, we have this error. Of course, you also want to disallow not identical, which means that you should probably hook this rule onto a binary operation and then eliminate anything that isn't identical or not identical. So we have the identical, that's 3 equal signs. And we also have not identical, which is the opposite. All right, so we don't have much time. And I still want to go through some points I want to tell you. So virtual nodes. These are something that are not like present physically in the code. That's why they are called virtual nodes. And that's for situations when we want to check that something is missing in the code, for example. So if PHPStan wants to check that your function is supposed to return something but doesn't return anything, you don't have a node that you can ask this right in the code. So you need to use something that PHPStan does by itself, and that's a special virtual node that will tell you that the return is missing. Or for example, if you want to write a custom rule about missing declare strict types on the top of the file, then you will ask for a virtual file node, and you will ask the first statement, and it should be a declare statement, right? If we didn't have a virtual file node, it wouldn't be possible to write a rule about missing declare strict types. Okay, and another feature is collectors, and this is for collecting information from multiple places in code. So the limitations of rules is that they just check a single place in code. So you can ask about everything that PHPStan knows about the code base, but you're still checking a single place at a time. But what if you wanted, for example, write a rule that checks that some code is unused, some method is dead? That's never called. You would use collectors for that. So collectors have a very similar interface to rules, but they are used to collect information. So for this use case, you would write a collector that would collect all function declarations. Then you would write the collector to check for all function calls. And in the end, in a special rule, you see all this information at once, which means that you can compare these two data sets, and you will report errors for functions that are declared, but they are never called. So this is a pretty natural feature to use in PHPStan. Unfortunately, I don't have time to show it to you, but rules can be tested with PHP unit by extending a rule test case. And if you want to look into everything that I showed today, you can use the documentation on PHPStan website. So I can show you where it is. So you can start at documentation. You will scroll down. Here's a section called developing extensions. And I recommend you to start at core concepts. So there are things that I showed you today, but you can read about them at your own pace, about abstract syntax key, scope, type system, and so on. And there are sections about custom rules, collectors, and also testing. So you can see how rules are supposed to be tested. Okay, so this is what I just showed you. And I also want to recommend you look at third-party rules, because it's already possible that your idea was already implemented. So at this point, is PHPStan extensions are a thriving ecosystem. So there are many, many more than I just showing you on this slide. But I recommend you to look at packages and look at these extensions. And one of my favorite ideas is the PHPStan to-do by extension by Marcus here, because this extension looks for to-do comments in your code, and these comments which have dates in them, the PHPStan will start failing after this date. So you will be forced to fix this at some point if you include a date. Yeah. And you can look for other custom rules in documentation on a page called Extension Library. And you can also search for even more on packages. So you can search for PHPStan, and in the right sidebar, you can click on PHPStan extension, package type, and it's going to show you many, many more extensions that you can use. And the points of these extensions are they are there to remove false positives from it makes PHPStan understands framework code better. So for example, if you are using Laravel, which uses a lot of magic, you can install a Laravel-specific extension to make some errors go away. But these extensions also introduce new rules for framework-specific code for the common gotchas that you can run into. OK, we are at the end. If you if you go back to work on Monday and you start writing some custom rules and you bump into any issues, you can open a discussion on GitHub, and myself or someone else will come help you with your problem. And so definitely use this option and ask us if you bump into any issues. OK, that's all from me today. And there are some free stickers on the floor. So after my talk, you can come grab them from the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ondřej. I think we are all very hungry right now. And I've heard the lunch is already out there. But I guess we have time for one quick question and serve ourselves afterwards. Is there any?
Someone
in the
back.
Second row?
Most important question, where can I get the PHPStan elephant?
Yeah, this is a prototype.
Yeah, I figured.
I cannot give it to anyone because I had to like sign a paper that this is prototype without like the common like paper hanging from the back because some children might choke on it, so I really cannot borrow it to you. So this is just a prototype, and I plan to sell them after I release 2.0 at some point in November. So you will be able to buy them from the website.
So every other question you have, you can probably ask Ondřej during lunch. And I have a special announcement. You can, if you are interested on the technical setup for this day, you can be at the back of the room 15 minutes before the next talk. And Sebastian, who has had his talk, the big one, will guide you through the setup. Yeah, it's not easy with all the Sebastians today. So let's grab some lunch and get ready for the afternoon.